Hello, this is Daniel Mart, and today I'm going to be doing another movie theory discussion topic. This is going to be for X-Men and what the timeline is now after the events of X-Men Days of Future Past. So the way I'm gonna be doing this video is I'm gonna be discussing the timeline before the events of Days of Future Past and the event and how the timeline is after the events of Days of Future Past. Past. Um, in order for you guys to understand this video, you would have needed to watch all the X-Men movies, which include X-Men, X2, X-Men Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, X-Men, not X-Men, the Wolverines, and then X-Men Days of Future Past. You would have need to watch all these movies in order to actually understand this discussion topic. Also, at the time I'm doing this, X-Men Days of Future Past recently came out, so I recommend you really watch that movie before you actually come here and watch this video, and watch all the other movies in order for you to understand this video. So, spoiler warning as usual, because I may spoil something. So spoiler warning as usual, starting now. Okay, so 10 seconds are up. So for those who still have yet to watch X-Men Days of Future Past or any of the other movies, which include X-Men, X2, X-Men Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, and and the Wolverine and X-Men Days of Future Past. If you have yet to watch any of those movies and are still watching this video, please don't comment down below or be messaging me. They never gave you a fair warning, because as usual, I did. So yeah, as I said before, the way I'm going to be breaking this down is I'm going to say the timeline of the X-Men universe before the events of Days of Future Past, and then after the events of Days of Future Past. Okay. So yeah. So for the first movie in the X-Men timeline will be X-Men First Class, which takes place in the 60s, right around the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the earliest film. Timeline wise, whatever. So yeah, the second film in the timeline is X-Men Origins Wolverine, which takes place right around the Vietnam War for the most part. I mean, you do get flashbacks of Logan or Wolverine, whatever you want to call him, before, like in the 1800s, like such as when he was a kid, also battling in World War I, World War II. So X-Men Origins basically takes place between 1800s, the mid to late 1800s, to more or less the end of the Vietnam War. So that's about a hundred, I want to say 100 year, maybe a bit more, but 100 year span for that movie alone. Okay, so yeah. So I guess the earliest movie will have to be X-Men Origins, if depending how you want to see it, or it could be X-Men First Class. X-Men Origins basically spans from the mid 1800s, more or less, yeah, mid 1800s to pretty much the late 1960s. First, 1970s. First Class takes place during the 1960s. So yeah. Now you skip ahead right around 2000, I want to say, and that's when X-Men, the first one, came out. You skip at least, I want to say, at least 2 to 5 years afterwards. So that puts you around 2005, 2006. And that's when you get X2, and then afterwards you get, I want to say, at least 2 more years into the future after that, you get X3, Last Stand, and then I want to say at least 5 to 10 years afterwards you get the Wolverine, and then afterwards, due to the events of Days of Future Past, because parts of the events of Days of Future Past were kind of inevitable in the original timeline, which is basically that the Sentinels take over, which I want to say takes at least another 2 years after the events of the Wolverine. So that's basically the whole timeline from start to finish, without much of Days of Future Past involved. Um, Within the original timeline, you have Wolverine's getting his adamantium skeleton, the bone claws. You have the X-Men being formed. Um, you have the X-Men being formed and all that. You also have some real life crisis, or real life events, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam War, 9/11, the Iraqi, Afghan, USA war. The war with Afghanistan after 9/11. So you also do have some significant actual world events in that timeline, which some of them do come into play in here, others don't. So yeah, you also have the assassination of Kennedy, and I'm pretty sure that's everything that more or less should affect the timeline, if I'm not mistaken. Are the real life events. We have World War One, World War Two, and I guess the Revolutionary War, but that's more for the Wolverine, and that really doesn't come much into play in this aspect. And then more towards the end, which is more of a fictional thing, which is the mutant war, mutant versus sentinel war, which is the mutants such as Wolverine, Magneto, and Professor Xavier going against the Sentinels. And yeah, okay, that's the basic. That's basically a quick and rough rundown of the original timeline of more or less how it would be. Um, yeah, I mean, also a few events you have there also would be the the death of Jean, and then her turning into Phoenix. So that is pretty significant. So yeah, which that also does come into play. The disappearance or killing of Scotty or Cyclops also comes into play a bit. Yeah, I'm trying to remember before I actually get into the next part. And the the mutant cure is also included there, and the mutant law from the first movie, which is the mutant law, that all mutants should be registered, or something like that, and that more or less, if I'm not mistaken, should be all the major events of each movie that play some kind of significance here, that I could think of. So yeah, now with the events of Days of Future Past actually coming into play, basically in Days of Future Past you have Wolverine who goes back in time and prevents Mystique from killing Boulevard Trask, whatever his name is, played by Peter Dinklage, I believe is his name. So yeah, now if now, the events that actually set up the Sentinels to go against mutants is that Mystique managed to kill Boulevard Trask, and she's captured. They use her DNA, and I presume they killed her. They use her DNA on the Sentinels, so they could adapt to the other mutants and track them and adapt to their powers and all these things. Now with the events that happen in Days of Future Past, which is basically what happens is that and they practically they have confirmed this, is that the events in both the X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men 3 Last Stand have basically been erased or altered, which is seen. Now, here's the thing. Now, even though those two are confirmed to be erased or altered, those two movies alone, there's two other movies that are either altered or significantly changed when you actually think about it. And I'm gonna go first off. I'm gonna go with the first two, which are said to be erased. Um, Basically, they say that the way that Stryker meets Wolverine and turns him into the Wolverine, with the adamantium claws, will be different. Now, different in what way is unknown. So, at least part of the X-Men Origins Wolverine has been changed. So, assuming that means the whole battle with Deadpool, and his brother Victor, I believe, in that factory should be erased. Meaning he didn't lose his memory at one point after he got shot twice in the head, which will also be noted. So that likely didn't happen in this new timeline. Um, so yeah. So at least I want to say at least 50% of what happened in X-Men Origins Wolverine did not happen because okay, so that means 50% is altered. Basically the whole origin story of how he got his adamantium claws and some of the aftermath after that. Now, the one movie that is completely erased is X3. Okay, meaning that Jean didn't die at the end of X3. Right, she didn't become the Phoenix at the end of X3. Now, that affects two other movies, most notably X2 and the Wolverine. Now, without the events of using common sense, without having the events of X3 Last Stand or X-Men Last Stand happen, you can't have a sequel, meaning the Wolverine, because the Wolverine is a sequel to both the X-Men Origins and also the X-Men Last Stand. So, using common knowledge and common sense, the Wolverine is automatically thrown out the door. That likely did not happen. Now, for X2, using common sense as well, that one's altered. That movie is altered. I mean, you could argue that it is thrown out the door as well, but I would prefer for you to say that it's altered. More notably, that at least half of the plot. So yeah, I mean, basically the way, because in the end of X2, what happens is, Jean dies, and then, it continues into X3 where she becomes the Phoenix, or Dark Phoenix, or whatever you call her. So since she didn't die, and at the end of X2, and this is known because at the end of Days of Future Past, she's seen alive as a cameo, along with Scotty, Rogue, Beast, or the adult Beast, played by Kelsey Grammer, a bunch of these other mutants in the future. They have cameos here more towards the end of this movie. So Jean and Scotty here, at the end of Days of Future Past, basically confirms that X3 did not happen to begin with, since Scotty is still alive. And since Jean is still here, that means at least part of the events that happen in X2 are also out the window. Most notably the central plot of the whole movie, which kind of sucks, but it has to happen. Basically, what I'm saying is that the events in X2 did not happen, or at least not the major events. Maybe some of the smaller things, such as some of the love, romance, and maybe a bit of the investigation on the mutants did happen. But basically, at the end, X2 is thrown out when you think about it. The whole plot is thrown out. And since Jean does not die, is thrown out. So yeah, you could argue that at the end of Days of Future Past, Wolverine woke up before the events of X2, but I find that unlikely, just because of the fact that Jean is still alive. And why would she be alive if she's in the future? Mostly because when Wolverine had to wake up after he altered the past, he had to wake up more or less right around when he went to sleep to go back into the past. If that makes sense, you have to watch Days of Future Past in order for you to actually make sense of what I'm saying. But it's like saying like this. Let's say I go back in time at 12. I start going back in time at 12 o'clock a.m. And let's say I was eating a yogurt. Okay. Let's say I go back half hour, okay, and I do some stuff, and then when I'm supposed to come back in time, into present time, I come back at 12 o'clock, and instead of eating a yogurt, I'm playing baseball, for example. It's supposed to be something like that, logically. So that's why I don't think that the events in X2 are bound to happen anytime soon, and that's why I believe X2, or at least most of X2, is thrown out the window. As I said before, the Wolverine being a direct sequel from both the X-Men Origins Wolverine and X3, X-Men Last Stand. Since X-Men Last Stand never happened, the Wolverine couldn't have happened either, or at least not likely. Meaning that the only two movies intact, or the only two movies intact are First Class and X-Men. First Class because it's before the events of X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men is because I don't really see any other way to. It's not really connected to most of the other movies in one way or another, besides the fact that they're X-Men, plot wise or logically. There's no other ways. There's no besides the fact that it's X-Men. I really don't see any way it could change. It could re-alter the events in the first X-Men. Maybe a few things, but very minor. But yeah, yeah. I mean, that's how I right now envision the timeline. Jean Grey does not die. Neither does Scotty. So yeah. Also, due to the events in X-Men Days of Future Past, many of the new mutants we've seen, such as Sunspot, Bishop, Sunspot, Iceman, I believe his name, Bobby, I know was his real name, and Warpath, I believe is also his name. All of them likely have not met the X-Men yet, have not met the X-Men yet. They've probably heard of the X-Men, but they haven't actually met them yet. So you also have to remember that. Mystique probably is not dead anymore. So yeah. And really, as of Days of Future Past, the only mutants confirmed dead and that's by Magneto, because it happened before the events of Days of Future Past. Happened between the events of First Class and Days of Future Past. The only people who are dead officially are Banshee, Angel, Azazel, Emma Frost, Riptide, and is that everyone? Yeah, Azazel, Emma Frost, Riptide, Banshee, and Angel. Yeah, those are all. And they were used for the Sentinel Project. Now you could argue due to events of Days of Future Past, the Sentinels never happened. But before the events of Days of Future Past, the Sentinel Project was in progress and was being thought of, and trying to advance it to see how it's gonna work out. And they killed those 5 mutants in order to see what would happen to the Sentinels and something like that. I mean, that's basically a really simplistic. I'm not simplistic, but that's basically how I envision the current timeline of the X-Men. Basically, First Class First Class is untouched. Basically, X-Men should be untouched for the most part. Maybe one or two things changed, but not likely. While X-Men Origins, for the most part, half of X-Men Origins is thrown out. X2 and X-Men Last Stand and the Wolverine are all thrown out for the most part. And with Days of Future Past in the mix, yeah, that's how I see it. Now, there is also a plot hole in this that you can't forget. Before I forget, I almost forgot too. And that is that when Logan or Wolverine went back in time, he was around the Vietnam War. This was during the 70s. Now, he can't be in two places at once because in X-Men Origins, he was in the Vietnam War, but in Days of Future Past, it was around the Vietnam War, so he couldn't have been in two places at once. Now, some people have speculated, he has a twin brother, which I call bullshit, or, this is after he returned from the Vietnam War, but right after the events of the Vietnam War, he was sent to Stryker to get his adamantium claws. So, that does bring a little bit more proof that part of X-Men Origins did not happen, or at least not the way it was supposed to work out. So at least half of Origins is thrown out the window, in my opinion. X2 is thrown out, sadly. Last Stand is thrown out, thankfully. The Wolverine is likely thrown out. So yeah. Regarding any events, real life events such as Vietnam, Twin Towers collapsing, or 9/11, the Kennedy assassination, and what else did I say? The Cuban Missile Crisis. Had those actually come into play? Well, it's like this. Remember how I said that in X-Men some of the things may have slightly altered? Well, I think that the things 9/11 could have been slightly altered in that aspect, and maybe the 9/11 actually did have a bit of a bigger impact on the X-Men than they actually showed it in the actual movie, but that's just speculation. So yeah. Now Vietnam, I've kind of already touched upon it with the plot hole with Logan and the Wolverine. How can he be in two places at once? That's why I see it. The Cuban Missile Crisis, where that's kind of a bit self-explanatory with what happens in First Class. The Kennedy assassination is something that happens. Well, yeah, the Kennedy assassination is something that's explained during Days of Future Past, and that was that apparently Kennedy was also a mutant. What his powers was, what his power was before he dies is unknown, but well, he got into Marilyn Monroe somehow, so yeah. Yeah. So that also slightly altered the events of Days of Future Past and what's come afterwards, because he is a mutant. He was a mutant. Now, if the government knew at the time is unknown, but it is assumed that Bolivar Trask knew to an extent that something was not right with Kennedy because of some of his dialogue when conversing of Kennedy. It seems like he knew a little bit too much, and thus he made the Sentinels, and you have the events of Days of Future Past. So overall, this is how I think the new timeline is. The whole beginning part of X-Men Origins Wolverine, him with his bone claws, going through the Revolutionary War, Revolutionary War or Civil War, whichever one. Which one was during the 1800s? Going through World War One, World War Two. Then that's where I stopped. He goes through World War Two and pretty much lives in peace up to the early 70s. That's when you have a plot hole. That's when it could have gone either way. You have the events of First Class, which are basically untouched. Then you speed up to the early 2000s when X-Men happens, and that's more or less untouched. Then after that, Jean and Scott are still alive. X2, X3, and the Wolverine never happened. So that's basically the new timeline. That's how I envision it. That's how I think it should be. Could it be any other way? It just depends on the other X-Men movies. But I think that this more or less covers how the new timeline is. If you guys have any other speculations or any other ideas of how the timeline could be, and have any more reasoning as to why it is, please comment down below. Don't hesitate. I'd love to hear your opinion. Maybe you do have some reasoning, or whatever the case may be. Comment down below on your thoughts on the new timeline. Remember to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I do movie reviews, comic book reviews, and TV show reviews. I do often do these types of videos of movie theories, so definitely stay tuned for those. As I said before, comment down below on your thoughts on the new X-Men timeline. Do you disagree with it or do you agree with it? Do you have any more reasoning as why you think I'm either right or wrong? Comment that down below. Like this video, share on Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, or whatever you guys prefer. And that's basically it for now. This is Daniel Mart signing off.